Danny Gregory, and I'm an artist and a writer and a teacher and a guy who has a podcast with his friend John Muir. John, say hello.
Hey, everybody. I'm John Muir. I am a scientist with a sketchbook and Danny's pal.
Here we go. Every week we pick a theme and we try to stick to it. We'll see how we do today. But our theme today is influencers. Who's influenced us to become the artists, the creative people who we are? And also, what can you do to be inspired? How do you use influences? And what is the path? What is the path, and how can others help you to achieve it? So let's jump into that and see where it takes us.
This will be fun.
Maybe it won't be great. We'll find out. I think it's already great, but let's see how it goes. So where are you? You're in a different place, quite a nice looking room.
Oh, that's right. I am at a secure, undisclosed location, keeping away from the Omicron variant, and have a chance to explore some really beautiful oak woodlands and to get out with some nature, and really enjoying that. So I'm down on a nature preserve that is in the vicinity of Monterey Bay.
I see. So not terribly far from your house, but
not terribly far. But it's great to get a big dose of green and see what wildflowers are popping out on the hillsides. Went for a hike yesterday with my wife and little daughters and found my first Johnny jump up of the year. So that's a lovely little yellow violet.
Oh, I see. I wasn't sure if it was a type of toad or something, but okay, good.
It's a good name though. My daughters really like the name Johnny Jump Up. So
Johnny Jump Up, that's great. Well, good. So it sounds like spring is vaguely coming. Is that possible?
Well, yeah, we do spring early here in California. Once it rains, things start to green up and all the wildflowers come out. So we're not on the schedule that most of the country, the world is, or places with only 4 seasons. We're now kind of getting into our green time. So this is mushroom season out here. This is first wildflower season. It's a really exciting time of the year that sort of the mountains are coming alive because we got a really good soaking rainstorm just a little while ago. It looks like we're still in for a drought, but we're able to get one really big, rich rainstorm.
That's great. Well, here it's been pretty cool, and actually, our pear trees are in the process of losing their leaves and starting to blossom simultaneously. So it's like autumn is very late here. So most of the trees that are going to lose their leaves have started to do it or have completed doing it. And our pear tree does this weird thing where it does both at the same time. So it's like dying and being born simultaneously. So yeah.
Oh, wow.
So that's
sort of an Ouroboros cycle of life. There's some kind of metaphor happening right in there, and I'm not exactly sure where it is, but that's cool.
Yeah. So it's also like horrible for people with allergies, like my wife. I actually have never had allergies before in my life. I've had them since I came here. So you're always sort of, coughing. And we have a new thing which we term FOVID, which is
FOVID.
It's like COVID, but it's faux. So it's FOVID.
Oh, yes. Oh, I like that. Every time I kind of I go, uh-oh, that's not. So FOVID.
Yeah, that's the clinical term. Pass that on to your wife, and maybe it can become part of the literature. But it's pretty common with us because we're hypochondriacs on top of everything else. So, you develop something, and when you start, your nose gets a bit runny, or you feel a bit bronchial. It's definitely a sign of impending doom. So, but actually, my brother-in-law, who's part of our pod, because originally they were just the two of us, and then my brother-in-law, my sister-in-law, he tested positive like 3 days ago. He's not in our pod right now. We haven't seen him in a week, but he's recovering from it. Okay. But man, it just seems like it's like an epidemic. It's everywhere.
Gosh. Yeah. And what's so insidious about this new variant is, or perhaps from the viral perspective, what is so perfectly brilliant about it. This is to be able to be So if you're not as damaging to the host, so a lot of people are not getting symptoms that are as severe, then that host is able to carry it around to more places.
Right.
And so if you're more infectious but less detectable, that is there's that's exactly that's the sweet spot that you want to be.
Right.
And but then, there's some individuals, particularly 60 and older, and people who haven't been vaccinated and people with underlying conditions who are getting really hit by this thing. So the emergency rooms are still just overflowing, even though on some people they have just sort of a suite of milder symptoms. They say, "Oh, this Omicron isn't that serious because my cousin got it and did pretty well." But that's not everybody.
And also, who wants to voluntarily get sick? Like, if you can avoid getting sick, try to avoid it. That's pretty
That's
basic.
that's that's right. So if you can,
Don't
I
get it.
figure that this thing is so infectious. At some point, we're going to get it. But
Yeah, that's
what you don't want to do is to get it right now, because right now our emergency rooms are overflowing, and those the monoclonal antibodies, the medicines that were developed if when you kind of an early onset of it, you can take this medicine and it makes your experience much better. Of the four types that we have, three of them, the three most sort of widespread of those, are not really effective against Omicron. And so it's a bad time to get this. So if I figure at some point I'm going to get it, but I want to wait as long as possible, because right now is a terrible time to get Omicron.
well, if you have a choice, don't get it now.
That's right.
But
That's right. So, and going out and exploring in nature, and or any place that you can kind of find some kind of quiet place with your journal, those are wonderfully socially distanced activities to do. Keep ourselves safe and keep ourselves connected to the world. I'm so glad that I have journaling during this pandemic. It's been keeping me sane.
that's a good point. We don't really make it that often, which is the life-saving powers of illustrated and nature journaling.
Yeah, but I think it
CDC needs to
is.
come out and tell people about that.
Yeah, my experience is that when I kind of go out there with my journal, I feel just sort of so much more grounded. I feel connected, and this whole crazy pandemic experience, tends to make me feel disassociated from everybody and or the world around me. I feel like I can't get near the world, but I can immerse myself in it, in the pages of my journal. And I think that's been a big part of me not going absolutely nuts over the last few years.
Absolutely. And Zoom, kind of on the other end of the spectrum.
I did not ever think that I would be embracing this medium. I thought that what my mission was to kind of get people out into nature, and so why would I kind of do something that is going to kind of get people on their computers more? But it has been such a powerful way of reaching people and reaching people all around the globe. Well, you've had that experience with Sketchbook Skool. It's an international, worldwide phenomenon,
That's
and
true. Yeah.
being able to connect with people all over the globe. I now have what I actually consider friends,
Well,
because
you and I have never met in person.
that's right.
We've only ever talked to each other on Zoom and the like. So yeah. I think, this pandemic has contributed to people's willingness to overcome their technophobia because they have strong incentives to do it. So I think in the past, I mean, I remember even when smartphones came out, and people were like, what do I need that for? I don't need to carry that around. But then suddenly you realize, like, okay, if you want to talk to your kids, you better get on Facebook. If you want to connect with people. So there become other reasons, and then it becomes, second nature, and it becomes an addiction fairly quickly too, using technology. But I mean, I've always loved technology. I have since I was a kid. So it's always been something, and it used to be a very niche thing. You were part of kind of a nerdy, tiny subgroup,
Yeah,
kind of like drawing.
the
Kind of,
kid with the computer. Yeah, that was stigmatized. That was kind of like the dad who's a ham radio operator.
exactly. And my first book was about ham radio, actually, strangely enough. But
Aha.
but yeah, I mean, I think now we've come to realize that technology is a tool. It's not a thing in and of itself necessarily. For some people it is. Some people it's a pleasure. It's like having, great stereo equipment or something. But for a lot of people it's a tool to achieve other things. But I feel like technology has made drawing into it's helped so much with help making drawing into the phenomenon that it's become, because we have we don't need to just be inspired by books that are published by supremely accomplished people, and we can see people like us at whatever that means, and we can share and we can connect and we can talk about it, and we can use drawing as a social connection, a thing that we have in common. We don't have to be making art in isolation anymore. Now, no matter who you are, no matter what level of art making you make, you can have an audience. I mean, maybe an audience of 3 people, all of whom are related to you. But in the past, that wasn't the case. In the past, you would just make art, and nobody. Maybe if somebody was in the mood, they would look at what you've done. But you had to think, I needed to become a professional, successful person who's endorsed and has passed the test of being in a gallery, of winning an award in a watercolor show, getting published by a publishing house. Now you just need to take a picture with your phone and post it on Instagram. Nobody's going to say you can't. So that's an incentive to do it, and it's a way of connection. And that actually brings me around to what we were going to talk about today, which was influences. And who has influenced us, and you know we can talk about people who we know, people we don't know, but I feel like the internet is such an opportunity for being influenced, and for influencing others. So, was there something you wanted to say before I adroitly turned the cruise ship around?
Well, I was just sort of thinking about the the way that we are able to share our art. There used to be kind of that there were gatekeepers who would say, like, that's not in the gallery, that is in the gallery.
Right.
And then you walk into the gallery and it's really ambiguous why some of that is there and why others aren't. And so then creating art was something that other people were doing. Without that gatekeeper and kind of giving us all permission to share our artwork, we're seeing a lot more work. And it's sort of, and in that is there's a really wonderful inspiration that comes from that. I can look at journal pages from just about anybody, and they are that person is going to be thinking about the world and seeing the world through a slightly different lens than I do. And I can look at that and be like, oh, that little move that you're making there, that is different than the way that I think and the way that I see. And so I love, just sort of one major source of inspiration for me is just going through all these journal and sketchbook pages that are now available to us, and thinking about what what has to be going on in somebody's head to have thought this way, to have seen this way, and realizing that I can try that too. And if I do, I will end up looking at the world through a slightly different lens.
That's interesting. It's like, yeah, picking up somebody else's eyeballs. Um,
Yeah, you try on somebody else's eyes, and there's something new to be learned there. And with that's a really beautiful thing about this kind of the sharing of art that has happened. You've seen that with Sketchbook Skool on the Nature Journal Club Facebook page. We also have all these people, sharing their artwork, sharing their pages, sharing their observations. And it makes I can look at any one of those pages and kind of go like, I can, for this afternoon, I can go take your idea and try it on. And it doesn't make me a clone of that person, but it just gives me a slightly different perspective. And I think that the more of that I intentionally do, the more it kind of shakes up my own etch a sketch. And that is just right off the bat is an incredible source of inspiration in artwork
yeah, I
or
mean,
thinking.
I think for years I would, there were half a dozen secondhand bookstores that I would go to in New York. The Strand being the biggest one of them. But there were several, and I knew that there were certain categories of in the bookshelves that you go to where you might find the good stuff. You might find stuff to do with illustration.
Hmm.
It wasn't stuff that was about drawing instruction, probably, and it wasn't stuff that was in the fine art section. But there were a few categories that might have it, and they would vary. Like sometimes it would be in comic books and cartooning, sometimes it would be in illustration, sometimes it would be in nature, sometimes it would be in travel. But there were places that you knew that if you went to, that's possibly where you might find something. And I would go every week, to these
Yeah.
places, and I would look, and then occasionally you would find something, or you might find a few pages in something. That was kind of what it was, and that stuff, might have been done by somebody who had lived 50 years before you. You couldn't, and you wouldn't necessarily be able to write to them. You wouldn't be able to see more of their stuff. You might see a book about sketchbooks, maybe. There really were very few, but you might see a book about it, and then there might be two or three examples of that person's stuff in it, but you wouldn't be able to ask them questions. You wouldn't be able to see what else do they do. You wouldn't learn and be able to know anything about them as a person, and so for me, like, I discovered this whole concept probably one day in the Virgin. No, it wasn't Virgin. It was Tower Records. So Tower Records had a store on Broadway in Manhattan, and they had a little department that had zines in it. So it had like two shelves that had these handmade magazines, small runs. There might be 50 copies of an issue. And that was another place that I would find interesting, like drawing stuff and handmade stuff. And I just like the aesthetics of zines. I like the fact that it was like handwritten, stuff. And that's when I discovered this magazine called Moonlight Chronicles by a guy named D. Price. I didn't know his name was Dan, which was nice. And so I found one copy of this magazine there. It was Xeroxed. It was basically Xeroxed lengthwise. So he took a 8.5 by 11 sheet and he Xeroxed it lengthwise and folded it in half. Had about 100 pages, and it was just this guy's journal. And it was he lives in Eastern Oregon in a little tiny town. He lives on a meadow that he pays $100 a year to rent, and on it he has
Hmm.
little buildings that he's built entirely by hand. So his bedroom is what is called a kiva, which is basically built into the side of a hill out of rocks, and then he lined the inside of it with wood, and then it has a little ceiling with a window in it. It is 8 feet, 10 feet, maybe round, and it's like a hobbit house. You have to get down on your hands and knees to crawl through this little wooden door, and then you're in the house. And it's not a house; it's one room with wall to wall carpeting, and some electricity that he's running from the road. And then it has various other buildings that he's built, including an outhouse, a sweat lodge, a little. There's a river that runs right alongside the meadow, and there can get water from there and put it in a cistern so he can take a shower, and he can has a little tiny hot plate so he can do some cooking. And then he has a studio that is basically another room that has this Xerox machine in it that he rents. And so his life is really interesting, and he lives on very little. At the time, he was living on like 20 grand a year or something, maybe. And his life is about journaling. That was his job. He's subsequently kind of stopped doing it, but for 10 or 15 years, that's what he did. And so I got this copy of this magazine, and I was like, okay, here I am working in advertising, working for big corporations in the belly of the beast in Manhattan. And I found, like, here's this person who I in some ways have nothing in common with, but who speaks like right to me. And I didn't know anybody
Mm,
else.
mm.
I'd never met anybody who was like this. And immediately I wrote to him, and I was like, I don't really know what's going on, but you know, and we became really good friends. He would come to visit me in Manhattan. I would go out. My son would come with me, and we would go to Eastern Oregon, and we would live in the Kiva, and we would go fishing, and we just couldn't have been more different lives than the two of us had. But through him, he was one of these people who also spent a lot of time researching this stuff, and he would like collect New Yorker cartoons that he liked, and he would collect, he would find people, so this is pre-internet. This is 1998, 99, not pre-internet, but pre-World Wide Web.
Yep.
One of the people who we found early in those times was a guy named Richard Bell, who was doing a similar thing in Yorkshire. And he was self-publishing little books about nature journaling. And he was kept the very first blog, really, that I'd ever encountered, where it was called Wild West Yorkshire. And he was basically blogging about what was going on literally in his garden, in his backyard. And he would write about the birds and the things that were growing there. And he would do drawings, and he had beautiful writing that he would do. And I was like, okay, so now I found another person, who lives almost as far away from me as Eastern Oregon, me in New York, him in Yorkshire. And then I found another person who was Indian, but who lived in Canada. And he was another connection. And then, so I slowly managed to find these points of people who were doing this. And again, this is 2002, 2003. And it was just this interesting, like, kind of detective work of finding who are these people. And anytime you would meet a person, they would have like three or four people who they were into, and then you could sort of absorb those influences and spread out. So it's I mean, now it's like gluttony. Now there's so much of it, and everybody's got likes and social media campaigns and all this other crap that goes along with it. But in those days, nobody was trying to get anything out of doing it. Nobody wanted to
Mm.
sell you anything. They didn't want to get you on, email lists. They didn't want you to do workshops or take classes. They just had to make this stuff and put it out there. It was very pure. And that went on for, probably 5 or 6 years. And then eventually uh, Web 2.0 began, and Facebook and all that other stuff kind of took over. And suddenly it just lost that beautiful kind of innocence that it had. But I discovered so many things that influenced me because of this little delicate network of things that I found.
That's a beautiful way of sort of describing kind of the evolution of these influences in a really organic way. The I We kind of lose the track of how you kind of came about different sources of inspiration when everything is just on a page with all these little icons that you can click to enlarge, and oh, that's neat. I like how you're describing one person sort of sharing the influence of another person, and that so that I learned about this person through this person. There's a history there, there's a relationship there, and also about these sort of how you're talking about these influences aren't just a person in a book, but somebody who you can go fishing with.
Right. And also, I think for all of us, we love this stuff whenever we would find little pieces of it. We would love it, but you didn't know anybody else who was interested in it. I mean, I didn't have none of my friends cared about that stuff. Nobody in my family was really interested in it. And then suddenly you would find one other little kind of candle in the dark, and you would say, okay, there's one other person out there who gets what's so cool about this. And you'd send it to them, and they would go, oh my God, this is so amazing. And that excitement, and also validation that you're not just a complete nerdy freak who likes something that nobody else likes, having other people who get it. And now what we've come to realize is, guess what? There are millions of people who actually like it and get it. Now we're all connected. So in some ways, it's better. Now there's different degrees of it because, of course, when I was first starting to learn about this stuff, it was a real obsession of mine, and all these other people were obsessives too. Now you can be much more of a tourist about it, and people say like, "Oh, I've discovered this thing," and you go, "Yeah, I discovered that like 10 years ago." But yeah, that's cool. So yeah, it's. But when I feel it's like once you tuned into the station and you say, "Okay, this speaks to me," whatever it
Hmm.
is. In my case,
Yeah.
it's this. In your case, it's slightly different. But because I think about you, like I've known about your work for a really long time. I never actually had met you and talked to you until this last year or so. But I knew that you were one of these people, but your niche was slightly different than mine because you
Hmm.
were, more in the science world, whereas my thing was more about sort of the mundane. So, and you say, okay, well, we have a Venn diagram, but can we actually cross over more by interacting with each other and go like, you know what, actually we have more in common with each other? Because I think that's a lot of what it is. It's like, it's not just about the thing you're obsessed with. It's about a human connection with somebody else and saying, you get it too. Like we're in this
Hmm.
club together. That's really great.
And so, I'm embarrassed to say I've already forgotten the name of the fellow with the hobbit hole and the fishing hole.
Dan Price, Moonlight Chronicles.
When you were out with Dan Price, did you go journaling together?
Absolutely. So he would come to New York. He came to New York a few times. And I remember and actually the first time he came, my first wife invited him for my birthday, and it was a surprise. She sent him a plane ticket, and she said, come to New York because he and I had been corresponding for a while. And so he shows up, and I was like, oh my God, she had thrown a party for me, and it was like as if the most beautiful girl in the world had suddenly shown up to the party. I was like, everybody else disappeared. I was just like, I have to talk to this guy. So I ended up like taking time off from work, and he and I would just walk around the city and just draw everything. And I more and more I got to see like, okay, this is how you live this life. This is how you do this thing. And I think for him, it was like he'd been an evangelist for drawing, but he'd never really had a person who was like as obsessed with it as he was. And so we would, sit around, draw a garbage can, sit around, draw like, a building, whatever it was, just doing it. And then I would go to Oregon and, this little tiny town and being in nature and doing all that. But then we would also go on trips. We went to Death Valley and we spent like 10 days going to all the ghost towns around Death Valley. We went to Colorado. So we would go because what we realized was he and I could meet up anywhere,
Hmm.
and it would be
Hmm.
interesting.
Yes.
And I was like, okay, this is the magic of it. I don't even need Dan Price to have this magic, which is anywhere you go, there it is. It's interesting. You just have to realize that, turn on that, put on that lens and go, okay, I can draw anything. And drawing will lead me to have these experiences. Because of drawing, I will go to a place I would never normally go to. I would never have
Yes.
gone to
Yes. Yes.
Death Valley otherwise. Yeah. Suddenly it's like, okay,
Well,
drawing it.
not just go physically to the place, but
No,
you're there in Death Valley. The process of drawing is going to draw you into that experience in ways that would have been completely inaccessible to you if you didn't have that pad in your hand.
exactly. Drawing became my friend instead. Like drawing was my companion now. Once I saw the depth of experience that I could have because of it. So in some ways, it was it connected me with other people, but its most important purpose was to realize that it is It's like what people talk about with virtual reality or augmented reality. So augmented reality, you hold up your phone and you look with the camera and suddenly information appears, right? You know what I'm talking about? So it's like on
My
the
phone's
screen,
not. I have a mildly clever phone, but it's not that smart.
you have like an old crank telephone, right? Yeah.
That's
No,
right.
so
It
there's
overheats and sends smoke signals.
wood powered. But now, no, I think augmented reality is like, if you have a map and you're looking at, you can hold up your phone and aim it at a building and it will give you information about that building.
Hmm.
Well, so you can just kind of scroll around, or you can, if you're in a foreign country and your phone can translate the signage on the building. Anyway, that's not really the point. The point is that drawing becomes a lens that you're looking through at everything. And so you look at anything and you say, what is that thing? Let me examine that thing. Let me understand that thing. Let me appreciate that thing, because I wouldn't have otherwise. And I think about when I used to travel for work. I remember going to Japan to shoot some commercials for American Express. And I was in Japan for a couple of weeks. I'd never been there before. And we weren't in Tokyo. We were like deep in Japan. And I hated it. I was like, I'm lost. I don't know anything. I don't understand anything. No, literally nobody would speak English. I mean, I remember going to like the hotel dining room and trying to get a glass of water and trying to pantomime water and trying to explain. Anyway, and I wasn't drawing at the time. A couple of years later, I started to draw, and then I realized, oh my god, like I was in Japan. Like
Hmm.
that would have been the most amazing drawing experience. But all I would do was like, go back to my room and read a book, because I was just like, oh, this is all too weird and too strange. Now I'm like, oh my God, there's so much. Everything is fascinating, and and I embrace adventure, and I'm really excited by it. I mean, and that was purely because of drawing. There's no other change in
Yes.
my life besides that.
Yes. And so it's, yeah, wherever you go, I sort of have this idea of it's not where you look, it's how you. There are levels of mystery, and that can be either in just the wonderful quirkiness of human beings, or the beautiful inventiveness of human beings, and the way we kind of relate to each other, relate to the land, or a natural phenomenon. You start digging into it, and it is, the places you can go with it are, it's bottomless, but you have to know how to get yourself to be able to lean in to that experience, because I think that our natural inclination is just to kind of look around and kind of, yes, I know what that is, kind of label things, and then you're out the door. And that's an efficient way to move through the world. But if you can find a way to slow yourself down and encounter a mystery that you otherwise wouldn't have done, and be able to, the journal for me is a tool that invites me into kind of a deep exploration of whatever it is. So right now I'm looking out, and there's a coast live oak tree that is out the window in front of me.
Mhm.
And as I'm sitting here, I'm noticing that there are a number of leaves that have been falling off of this coast live oak tree. And over to my right, there's another coast live oak tree. And I'm not seeing any. See, there's another right now, real time. There's another leaf that just fell off of this coast live oak tree. So these are not deciduous trees that are like dropping their leaves all the time at this time of year. No, 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 no. These ones keep their leaves their whole time. So what's going on with this tree? I mean, there's a little mystery right here, that there's another one, and none out to the one on my right. So there's
And
there's a
you thought this podcast wasn't going to be exciting, folks.
yeah. Oh boy. But it's not that, like, why would you get so excited about that? The reason I get excited about that is because there's something going on here that I don't understand. And it, through the act of paying attention, that sort of brings out this little mystery. The act of paying attention is how I can go about answering these sorts of questions. The world around me becomes this kind of oh, actually, on the tree that I said no leaves were falling off of, one leaf just fell off of it. So this may be a sampling bias that I haven't been here for very long. So actually, just let me unpack that just to kind of geek out on the science side of things on this. So there's the law of small numbers is that when you're looking at something with a really small sample size, it's really easy to see patterns that aren't there. And so when my kind of general strategy for geeking out on anything is I'm walking around and I'm looking for some pattern. I'm saying, is there a pattern here? Is there a pattern here? Is there a pattern here? Like, where's the pattern? Where's the pattern? And then I will, when I'm intentionally looking for it, these patterns are, human brains are wonderful sort of pattern recognition devices. And these patterns will start to emerge from the environment around me. And then because I've been intentionally like wanting to see this pattern, like saying like, there's this phenomenon here, this one tree, it's dropping all its leaves. Then it becomes really easy for me to ignore when the other trees are dropping their leaves. And every time this tree drops leaves, I say like, see, this thing is just dropping them all the time. But what I'm doing there is just what we call confirmation bias, where I've got this idea, I've got this pet pattern now, and I will cherry pick observations that match that. Don't worry, this gets back to journaling in just a second. So I cherry pick all the observations that sort of fit this pattern, and I ignore them on the other one. Actually, the one that I said there's no leaves falling on it, now just two leaves fell off of it. So that's now making me think that this pattern may just be law of small numbers, that I was just sitting here for a little while and just by chance more fell off this tree at a time that none were falling off that one. We're gonna have to find out. But what is neat to then to try to do is to try to separate out, for me as the scientist, separate out what are is just sort of this random variability and what are the real patterns. And you can apply that to anything in our lives. But that's kind of a fundamental part of my kind of nature geeking out. I'm going out, I'm looking for patterns, and then I try to figure out, is this pattern really, is there really something to this? And the best way to do that is for me to then intentionally really watch the other tree and say, are you really not dropping your leaves? Okay, there's another one, right? And so I look for evidence against my pet idea, and then there's I can that helps the stronger patterns emerge to the surface, and I have this way of kind of back checking them to make sure I'm not doing this confirmation bias thing that people love to do. So that is sort of sciencey geeking out, but it's sort of baked into that is this idea that wherever you are, there is something weird and fascinating going on that you can unpack if you pay more attention to it. And the same is true with looking at trash cans.
Yeah, I mean, I think your journal, your sketchbook becomes kind of an opportunity for you to do that, an opportunity for you to go and become a reporter or become a historian or become a scientist, become a psychologist, to become a social scientist. I mean, I remember when Dan and I went to when we were visiting Death Valley, we were driving around and then we came upon a plane that was crashed, like a small single engine plane that was crashed and sitting by the road and clearly had been there for a while. We were like, this is amazing. Like, I'd never seen a crashed plane before. We went over, we were looking at it, and clearly it had been there for a while. And it was outside of this sort of like a mobile home, like a sort of double wide kind of thing. And it turned out that this mobile home was a brothel. So we're like, okay, so there's a crash plane outside of a brothel. So we sat down and we were drawing the plane because it was, just an interesting thing to draw. So drawing the plane, and then we had to find out what the story was. So we decided to go up to the brothel. So we go up there, we ring the bell, a woman, scantily clad woman comes to the door, and there we are, these two dorks carrying sketchbooks, and she was all sort of like, come hither, and we were like, well, no, actually, we're not really interested in that, but we just wondered about the plane, like what the deal is. And it turned out that like the guy who owned the brothel had this idea to promote it, where he would have the women who worked for him skydive as like a promotional thing. And none of them were really interested in doing it, but he for a while tried to encourage them to do it, and like one or two did, but that was his whole big idea. And then eventually the plane crashed and they just left it there. So we were like, they tell us this whole story, and more and more of these sex workers basically came out to like hear the story and to participate and to give their bits, and they're all standing around with us, and we were like, oh, we just were interested because we were drawing it, and they were like, really, you were drawing it? We said, yeah, and we showed them in our sketchbooks, and they were like, this is amazing. Can we buy these drawings from you? And we said, no, these are in our sketchbooks. That's no. But I said, you're welcome to like make a copy. And they said, oh, we have a copier. It's like, great. So they took our sketchbooks, made copies of them. And they said, we're going to get these framed and hang them in here. And I was like, okay, great. Thank you. Cool. And then we took our sketchbooks and we left. And I was like, this is like a really strange, unlikely adventure. Wouldn't have happened without drawing. But yeah, we got to go into Nevada brothel and emerge with our virtues intact. But, so if you go to a brothel in Nevada and you happen to see a plain drawing on the wall, it's possible that it's mine.
This is that's right. And so what's also really fun about this story is that the the very often when if I'm walking down a trail and I see something that catches my eye, I'll sit down and I'll make a sketch of it. The next people that are walking down the trail, they will stop. Let's say I'm drawing a little landscape. They will stop, look down, and notice that I'm drawing something, and then they look up at the landscape that I'm doing, and they go like, "Oh, that's beautiful!" And then they pull out their cameras, snap a picture of it, and head back down the trail. Of course, I could have stopped any of 100 places up that trail because there's 100 little mysteries. But when
Right.
you see somebody drawing the airplane, you see the drawing of the airplane, it how the artist eye, we select out what is interesting to us. If you had shown them, I took a photograph of your airplane, no one would care. But when you are have your drawing of it, you've made all these decisions of like, this is important, I'm going to show this to sort of give this sort of sense to it. You have kind of curated that experience, and then you can look down at somebody's drawing and you can see the beauty that they saw in it, and then you look up at the landscape and you go like, wow, that's really beautiful over there. So I think that perhaps when you hold up your drawing, that kind of excitement about it, a big part of that is that you're inviting that other person just to kind of have a little glimpse of just how wonderful the world is around them.
But I think that is one of the main purposes of art, right there. Right. So, I mean, I've had the same experience sitting on a sidewalk in some strange city, drawing some random thing, drawing a deli or drawing a garbage can or drawing an old jalopy of some kind. Somebody comes by and they say, wait, what are you drawing? I'll say, oh, I'm drawing, that pile of trash over there. And they'll say, why are you drawing that? I'll say, well, look at it. They can't bring themselves a lot of times to actually look at what I'm drawing. And they'll stand there and they'll say, oh yeah, and then they'll start to see it. They'll start to put on
Yeah.
their artist's eyes as well. But I think a lot of times when we make art, its purpose is to break the bubble between us and other people, and to say
Mm.
like, let's be in each other's heads a little bit, and to realize how much we actually have in common, or how much we have to teach each other, and that we can say, this is what I'm seeing that's beautiful. And you don't even need to see the original thing, but you can just say, oh, I'd never thought to think that a garbage can could be a
Right.
beautiful thing.
Right.
And now that I've seen that, it's enriched my life. It's made me open to the possibilities of doing that wherever I go and seeing like an artist, thinking like an artist, and also seeing like you saw. Forget about being an artist, but just saying, oh, I can be in your head. I can see what you see. And, that's like an intimate, beautiful thing that we don't really have many opportunities to do. And I imagine for a
Yeah.
scientist, that's also the case, which is basically saying, I've observed this phenomenon that maybe nobody has observed before. And if you observe it, maybe you will build on my observation with your own observation that will take this even deeper, even further, or to new and different places. So it is a dialogue. The art is a purpose of being a dialogue. And so often what we think art is supposed to be about, what we think we're supposed to be accomplishing, doing something that looks like an accurate rendering, can actually even get in the way of that. That if you're trying to be photographic in your depiction of the thing that you're drawing, you might actually be um, suffocating your subjective point of view, which is actually the most valuable thing that you could be giving. So it's sort of like you look at a Picasso drawing and you don't say, well, it doesn't really look like the person. That's completely missing the point, right? And not giving, I mean, it's like you don't want to see a snapshot that Picasso took. You want to see how he saw the world so you can enjoy that too. So our subjectivity is, in fact, the most important part of it, not our objectivity. Our subjectivity is the thing that makes it wonky or makes it, odd, or makes you emphasize one part over another and not be perfect, because perfection is the hardest thing to learn much from. So, yeah. So originally we were going to talk about all the things that had influenced us. I, I mean, I'm not sure quite where we go with that, or if we go with it, or if we've found a different direction to go
Well,
in. Or did you have something to
well,
add to this whole conversation?
well, what I like about it, I expected our conversation today, yeah, to be like, this artist, this artist, this artist. These are people who I,
Yeah, I
really
have a, I
took
have a
this
list
from.
here. I have a list here of
Yeah,
people that are writing it down before I talk to you. And it's like, oh, I want to talk about these people, and then I was like, well, nah, that's just like that's just sounds like footnotes.
but the story of, so what the turning point was the story of Dan Price,
Yeah. Mhm.
and how being, and also the it makes me think about the power of being in the presence and sort of sharing the experience with another person who is sparked like that, right? And when you get out with them and you you both are you're both just geeking out on things, and you can get into their kind of geekdom world and they can get into, you're inspiring each other, ideas are rubbing off on each other. It is, and also you can look at their journal page from a place, not just a place that you visited, but you were there at exactly the same time, and look where they went with it. I think that is such an even more exciting invitation to think differently, because I was in this exact place at this exact same time, and you were all over the garbage can, and and now I'm thinking to myself, like, oh, like I missed the garbage can. I should have done the garbage can. But it's not that the garbage can was the most important thing to see there. It was how you see the garbage can. So if I can kind of get into, like, how do you see the garbage can, I can apply that to the pile of trash.
Right. I mean, I think it's important. It doesn't mean that your influences have to be actual people who you go drawing with, although there are lots of opportunities for doing that. It can also be that you look at the work of somebody and you say, "Oh, you're allowed to write on your drawing? Oh, you're allowed to write with a brush? Oh, you're allowed to, like, put a big splash of red in the middle of it? Oh, you can do this?" Those kinds of things, that's other ways that influences work, where you suddenly say, "Oh, it never occurred to me that," and it isn't necessarily say, "Okay, I'm gonna put big red splashes," although you might start by doing that. But then you might say, well, actually, I feel more like, drawing green lines in the background, so I'm going to do that. but I didn't really realize that that was even a thing that you could do. And I mean, this is one of the things we have with Sketchbook Skool, particularly with Spark, which is the program that you teach in, is you have a whole bunch of people sitting down together to work on the same project, and then you get to see what they've done in response. The exact same thing. We're sitting together right now, together, and we're all doing the same thing. And you say, oh, like it would never have occurred to me to do that. Or, oh, it's interesting that she's noticed that thing. And I didn't really care about that so much. I wonder why that was. That was interesting. Oh, let me ask about that. Let me see. Let me try that. All those kinds of things that we learn from seeing how other people do, because it's so easy to get caught in our own heads, right? We get caught in
Hmm.
our own heads. We see things a certain way. We do things a certain way. We use certain tools. We reflexively go to certain places, but then somebody forces you to do a different thing. And, I mean, I've felt that way when I've taken your class, is I've suddenly thought, you know, like I've never looked at birds that way. I've never thought about how they're put together. I've never done that. And then it makes me think not only about birds and drawing birds, but it make me think about birds that I just see around when I'm not drawing. But also I'll think about other animals, and then I'll think about how trees are put together, and then I'll think about how cars are put together, and I'll think it just goes on and on. So you learn this thing, and then you use your creativity to apply it in other things. But if you
Hmm.
exist in your own little ecosystem and you don't have new things coming in, you stagnate, and
Hmm.
and it becomes old. And the thing that, I mean, I think both of us have experienced this over and over again, is there's no end to what you can learn about drawing.
Right.
It's endless, 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 endless. And you learn it from seeing what other people do. So whatever you've settled into, keep going. And if you haven't gotten anywhere you like, it just means you need to try put some other spices into your stew and see what comes out of it, because somebody else might be doing something that had never occurred to you that you could are allowed to do, and wow, it just lights things up inside of you.
And that also makes me think about sort of the degree to which to which our this journaling and this art can be a social endeavor. That there's I think there's the myth about, I think, both scientists and artists, that the artist is there kind of alone by themselves in their studio and they're like doing their thing, and then I have made art, right? And also
Or the
that's
genius, the eureka moment for the scientist, right? Who's like,
yeah, and yeah, the scientist, the sort of the myth of the mad scientist is like, so crazy hair, white coat, alone in their lab tinkering away. And so art, when it is really advancing us and as a process, is often in a social context. You think about like the Impressionists, there was a team of people who were like meeting in the same cafes, and they were looking at each other's art, and they were looking at like, whoa, you can do that. Oh, that's so crazy. Okay, yeah, okay, all right, this gives me an idea. And then they run back, and so they're playing off of each other. Similarly, science is this social endeavor where people are doing their thing, they are sharing what they're doing with other people, and then they are giving each other feedback about what works and what doesn't work. And this person is working on this over here, this person is working on this over here, and this person gets this little piece, and you're putting this little piece together with this little piece. They're meeting together, they're taking all their best ideas, they're putting it in the paper with their techniques, and they're sharing that with the other people. The other people are getting that information and kind of picking through it, and either saying like, you might want to kind of review this idea because that doesn't make sense to me, or they say, oh, this is crazy brilliant, and I'm going to use that as the next stepping stone for what I'm doing. So science is this sort of social endeavor. So is can be art. And if you have an opportunity to create for yourself a it can be a sketching buddy, just somebody who you who you enjoy being with. You love the way that their brain works. What they do inspires you, what you do inspires them. And with like Dan and Danny kind of going out in the desert there, you guys are going to, as a result of that experience, you're going to come away with something greater than you would have had each of you on your own. And
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
and we
Right.
can
Go ahead.
we can create that for ourselves as well if you intentionally can look for in your world, in your life, is there, this journaling is great, but what about, can you essentially make your own, knitting circle of 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 sketchers, of journalers, of people that somebody that you are going to invite into your current bubble and is going to help make this process even richer for you.
Yeah, I think that that's absolutely true. I think, I think about the urban sketching movement. Urban sketchers, there are organizations in certainly every major city, many secondary cities as well. Go and sit with a bunch of people on a pavement and draw together. At Sketchbook Skool, we have the schoolyard, which is our social network, and that's again an opportunity for people to share their work and get feedback. But I think, we a lot of times when you're starting out, you're afraid to show your stuff. You're afraid that you'll be embarrassed. And the fact is that it's never too soon to show it. It's never too soon to share what you're doing. And you can always do it in the guise of like, look, I'm just starting out. Like, here's what I've got. What do you think? And can I see what you're doing? But I was thinking, I made a video a couple weeks ago about Paris and Van Gogh and how Van Gogh, when he came to Paris, his work was radically transformed, exactly the experience you were talking about, by becoming part of the expressionists. And you can see the before and after, or what I call the sort of brown paintings that he was doing when he was still in Holland, that were, he was trying to be a particular kind of artist. He was trying to be a sort of, middle class, like I'd paint scenes of peasants working and shades of, ochre and sepia and things like that. And then he gets to Paris and he starts to see all these other guys who are going crazy with color, who are, you know, doing things like pointillism and expressionism and impressionism, and are seeing the world completely differently, making paintings completely differently. And almost immediately, he changes. He becomes who we now think of as Van Gogh. It lit the fuse. And no matter how long he had spent working in, his grotto in Holland, he would just have been another mediocrity. But suddenly, by being excited by other people and having, and trying to impress them, trying to be part of their circle, all those kinds of things pushed him to do new and different things, and then eventually transcend them and go off and do stuff that would influence other people for, the next couple centuries. But, that's the opportunity that we have. And I think we can do, if we can't find people like I was fortunate to find one person, then more people. You can also engage with their art. You can just engage with art, and you can say, you know what, I'm going to take a Van Gogh drawing and I'm going to copy it. I'm going
Yep.
to, I'm going to
Yep.
look at this technique and I'm going to allow myself to see the way they do. I'm going to look at a coffee table book of, of a painter who I like, and I'm really going to study it and really try and take apart, how did this person do it and what were they actually doing? And so those kinds of ways, there are ways of doing it. If you're too afraid to go and meet with other people, there's still other things you can do to influence yourself and to do it. I mean, I always think it's sort of depressing when I see like teenagers who, either they copy photos of movie stars, or they draw manga, and they go and they'd find all the manga things and they find manga how to's, and they go step by step, like, how do I draw this particular character? It's like, yes, but where's you in this? Where are you? How are you injecting, and how are you adding to the conversation? That's really what you want to do. You want to add to this kind of global conversation that's happening because we're sharing what we see. That's really the core of this whole thing. So, all right. Well, it seems like our opportunity to share long lists of recommendations has passed us by. Maybe we'll do that in some other forum of like, here's 50 artists you should check out. But that would have been dull anyway. But I think we've passed the hour mark. So let's wrap it up, unless there's some final pearls of wisdom you'd like to share.
I guess I've got one more thought about the buddy system,
Do it.
and and that is that the other thing that it does for me is that it if you ever get stuck, having somebody that kind of helps you kind of be accountable and be there for you is a great asset. You know, the statistically, if you are trying to quit smoking on your own, you are going to fail. However, if you if you and your partner are trying to quit smoking together and you're supporting each other in that your your chances of being successful are much, much better. If you're trying to start an exercise program and you do it on your own versus with somebody that you feel a real connection with and is a buddy, or changing our eating habits or whatever it is, if there's something that we're trying to do or trying not to do, the social part of that is huge in our success or failure. And that I think it's useful to kind of just consider that in terms of our artwork. If I'm finding myself not motivated and on my own, I want to think about, like, am I doing all my stuff kind of in isolation from one of the primary ways that human beings have in our repertoire of being successful with an endeavor, and that is to make it social.
That's a really good
Um,
point. Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah.
to be
So I think there are many ways of finding other people. I think you have to be willing to, you know, let go of being embarrassed. You have to relinquish your ego to some extent. You have to be generous with the person you're working with and supportive of each other. But I see it in Sketchbook School a lot. We have couples who are joining together. We have mothers and daughters who are joining together, and they are encouraging each other. Like, let's meet on Thursday at 2 o'clock and let's do this thing. That makes it a lot easier to keep the habit going, and also to have somebody else to show it to. All those kinds of things. It just makes it more fun, and making it fun is just a really underrated part of this whole thing. That is the main point. You're not trying to become a genius. You're not trying to make stuff that's going to go into a museum. You're trying to make the time that we have left on this planet as rich and joyful as it can be, right? So,
That's right.
and honestly, when you were 5, you knew that this was the way to it. When you were 5, you knew that picking up a crayon was fun. It still is. Buy yourself a box of 64 and, a newsprint pad or whatever it is. You can spend, $2 and you can start having fun in a way you have never had before. Well,
Yes.
not since you were small. So yeah, it is, and also, inspire yourself, but try and respond to the things that inspire you. Don't just go like, that's great, I love that. But try and say, what can I do with that thing that will make me make my thing? It's don't be just a passive audience. Be engaged and
Hmm.
turn your inspiration into, something that lights your fuse. That's really the key to it, is to be
Yes.
provoked and inspired.
Yeah. The mindset of being a maker rather than just a consumer.
That's the core of it. That's what we all need to do with our lives, I think, is to make, not just take. So, and also realize that when you're doing it, your process is going to inspire somebody else. You're helping to pass it forward, even if you're not the greatest genius and the most. Just the fact that you're doing it, that in and of itself. I have had so many people say, when they see me drawing, they say, I wish I could do that." And I just say, yeah, "Of course you can. Sit down. Let's
That's
draw."
right.
So, all right. And so we've managed to cram pack another hour with blathering. Thanks for joining us today, and we will see you again probably next week. Hopefully, we'll be here and we'll continue the conversation.
Danny, it was so much fun going off script with you.
I know. God, why can't we stick to a plan? Stupid creative people. All right. See you next time.
Until next time.
Bye.